Brap is a slang word for the sound a motorbike makes when on the throttle. It's a thrilling sound to many moto enthusiasts. However, when you rev it up a little something extra, it may be viewed in a negative light and as loud and obnoxious. It's a balance on the throttle, and today's episode is called Brap Brap Your Voice, where we encourage you to make a little noise by exercising assertive communication. Now, oftentimes in careers, relationships, and other human interactions, a woman exercising assertion can be labeled as aggressive. We're going to address why that is not the case. And conversely, talk about those that maybe have a more passive approach and simply aren't being heard at all. There is a world of difference between the communication types. And assertive communication shows respect for others' needs, while aggressive communication, that does not. Having ambition and speaking with authority are not aggressive acts. So today we will dive into why it's important to hone your assertive communication, as it is a tremendous tool in life to express yourself effectively and stand up for your points of view. This is the Motovation.
To be clear, I feel like I should just say this, preface it.
Own up.
Like, I was up till 2 last night doing nothing fun. So 2 a.m, finally fall asleep, have an alarm set because we are recording here at 8 a.m., which we never do, but it just so happens we are. And I wake up to the sun and I thought, that's not right. I shouldn't see the sun because that would mean I should be recording already. So my brain has just drank the coffee. I've only woken up about 15 minutes ago. So just know this will be fun. And we'll find out how it goes. But I'll grab my thoughts together. So I'm actually going to say the actual definition that I got online. Assertiveness, it's a healthy way of communicating. It's the ability to speak up for ourselves in a way that is honest and respectful. And every day we're in situations where being assertive can help us, like asking somebody something that you would like, speaking up for your needs, approaching people at work, your family members, your relationship. It's your communication to essentially advocate yourself while considering the other person. And you're expressing your opinion, you're speaking directly. And assertive behavior means that you want to say things directly without beating around the bush. And you're direct with remaining respectful to others. A lot of people that are not assertive, well, they suffer from a lack of confidence and low self-esteem. And it doesn't necessarily have to be to the extent where they don't believe in themselves or they don't. And this is me more talking now than reading this, but it doesn't necessarily mean just that lack of confidence. As Christy, you mentioned, there is conditioning that has happened, especially for women, around speaking up for your needs, because there's so much that is taught to us, telling that little girl essentially that her opinions are secondary to the male, or less intelligent, or less important, or less legit. In almost every capacity there is.
I think even in movies when they're like, the men are talking, like shush, 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 the men are talking.
The amount of my friends that are female or identify as that are finding it so difficult to now, but want to so badly, or working so hard to use that voice and understand how to use that voice and then actually do it in real time. You know, it breaks my heart in many ways, but then it also is exceptionally encouraging because that representation that's out there everywhere now in and around, like, no, you have something to say and it's valid and it's important and you get to, and here's how. That momentum is pushing them to step into that and no longer just like, this is the most comfortable place to be. It's just kind of like, it's just easier to not say anything, go with the flow, go with what everybody else wants. But then now that they're in their mid-30s, they're like, I'm not so happy. There's so many of my needs that are not being met because I'm not speaking up for them. And why the fuck am I not? And this is some bullshit that I've made to believe that my needs are not as valuable as the others, which a lot of time is males.
Well, and I find when you say, yeah, it's easier in their minds of it's staying internalized, them being agreeable, the people pleasing, the yes, oh, what would you like? But really, as you say, it has led to unhappiness. It's not easier. It's not easier. It's uncomfortable
Not in
because
the long run, no.
every single time that they're being agreeable, they're saying no to something. If you say yes to something, there's the other side of the pendulum when you're saying no. And so when you look at those moments where you're saying yes to something, being agreeable, that maybe is something you are not actually in agreement with, guess what you're saying no to? Yourself. And then when you continue to do that, that's going to compound for sure. The whole reason why I wanted to tackle this episode is because in a very short span of time, I had a couple individuals come to me in just regular conversation and say, oh, yeah, I'm a recovering people pleaser.
Hell yeah.
And it made me kind of take a step back because I do feel a bit lucky. I think I've always been a little boisterously opinionated, and opinionated isn't even a bad word. Although I hesitated to almost say it there because I'm like, don't dare say you have an opinion, which is funny. It's like funny when you even notice those things that aren't conditioned in our mind. I'm like, opinionated is not a bad word. But even I grew up in a household when I think of my own mom who had just stayed with us over the last week. And you can tell, because it's something that she's never looked at, that even to this day, as a woman in her late 60s, there's so much of that condition. Something as simple as trying to decide where to eat or where to go for the day. And it's always leaning on the other individual for that moment of, are you good with this too? And not really having a voice to speak up. And I can't imagine the discomfort that would be. You're either getting taken along for the ride or feeling like your own thoughts are completely invalid, or that emotions you have toward things are completely invalid. That passive life honestly terrifies me, because at what point are you not living your own life anymore?
My mom was the same, is the same. You know, she really, really struggles to say no, even if she doesn't want to do something, but she's like, but they, the identity around, I'm helpful. I'm kind. I'm selfless. I'm all those identities force that person to essentially put the needs of other people in front of their own. And yes, it's a beautiful thing to do. And that's a part of, it's a huge part of being a person in a world where, we do thrive and are at our best with community and all those different things, and stepping outside of just yourself. But you have to put your oxygen mask on first. And what happens too is that you end up doing those things to have the validation that, yes, I am a good person. Yes, okay, good. I am who I thought I was. I'm kind and selfless and all those different things. And you prioritize the validation around what you're doing versus it just being doing it because that is what you want to do. And that is what feels aligned with your value system rather than an identity. And the other component too is that you end up resenting. You end up getting really resentful because you're like, they didn't show me the deep appreciation that I deserve. And then you're like, well, and that person's just like going about life because they were like, oh, thanks, I appreciate that, right? Because it was like a medium-sized ask or a whatever ask, but these are all these like little chips that you've put another person's needs, wants, priorities before your own. And that ends up building up all these really unhealthy, emotions within yourself. But you've trained yourself to always say yes. And so saying no brings on a tremendous amount of guilt. And I'm like you, Chrissy, I was very, very much, very, very, assertive with my opinion. It was so strong in me that the conditioning didn't take. Like that was the only reason, truly. And also, I shouldn't say the only reason, because the other thing was I always really was a very big observer of kind of adults' behavior and what looked like it didn't work so well. And I watched a lot of my friends' moms, and including my own, be very submissive and be very people pleasing. And I saw the like undercurrent of just unhappiness within that. And I was just like, and I was watching too, these, the dads and the brothers and everybody just really be able to like comfortably say those, and almost to the point where like they pushed their own agenda to the point of bullying. And I was like, oh, no, 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 that is no. And so I became almost on a little too bit on that side of things as a young kid, because I learned that like as a girl, you had to really be assertive and like dig your heels in. So then I became a very, very, very stubborn person, which I think I probably always was on the cusp of, but it really doubled down because I had to dig my heels in so hard, because every single way within society was trying to push me to not be this person, because this wasn't being a good girl. This wasn't being appropriate. This wasn't being, ladylike, all those different things. I was being dramatic. I was being aggressive. I was being all these things that were in a negative light. But I had those kind of components that was like, absolutely fucking not. And I've held on to that. Yeah. But going back to what, assertiveness really is doing so in a respectful way and communicative way. And it's taken me quite a long time. And I'm still, really, and probably always will be, working on that, of how to do that in a way that is really, truly healthy communication, and not being triggered to going, dig your heels in. They're coming for you to sway you. And you can't budge,
Totally. And it is a balance. And I'm glad that you say that, because when we talk about the pendulum swing, of course, we know the subset that has grown up conditioned in that passive mindset. And the opposite end of that pendulum swing is aggressive behavior, which I don't think is a quality of yourself, Lori, because really, when you talk about aggression, it's when you're not taking other people's feelings or viewpoints into consideration at all. It is sharing your view and not really making space for their view to come into the picture. Because the thing is, when you're assertive, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to have your way. Let's say in just the case of a conversation and sharing some point of view, what it should be is an interchange of information. You can have a viewpoint and agree to disagree with somebody. That is a beautiful thing. Everyone leaves the conversation feeling heard. It doesn't mean that you had to sway them over to your side of point of view, but everyone is heard and balanced. I think even right now in society, when you talk about aggressive behavior, there are a million examples of people that are exercising their point of view that have no space and have bullying characteristics toward anyone that does not agree with them. Dramatics is something, because Lori and I, even before we started this in the intro, I had mentioned aggressive. And in Lori's experience, oftentimes when women are expressing assertion, dramatic is another word that she mentioned comes up as well. And I was like, absolutely. Like, I think both happen. If a woman is just plainly saying something in an assertive manner and basically standing true to their point of view, oftentimes this is where it makes other people uncomfortable. And that's a good thing to keep in mind if you are someone who is itching to express more of their self, to recognize you are going to encounter that. Especially people get uncomfortable when you decide to behave in a way that they aren't habitually expecting you to come to the table like. And that's why a lot of times when you have people that go through a strong phase of self-growth, sometimes long-term people in their lives or things like that may start to peel away because they aren't comfortable. You are not operating how they have deemed you or identified you to operate.
Status quo has changed, and that's
Totally.
a very, very, very uncomfortable thing for the person on the other side.
It's not even that you are threatening them necessarily in your behavior if you are exercising assertiveness appropriately, because obviously, again, if it leans on the side of aggressive, then most certainly you are being threatening to the individual. But if you are in the balance of just expressing a point of view, that is not a threat, but it may be perceived as a threat to them.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because that's such an important thing to know, because especially that people pleaser in you. And even if you're like, well, I'm not really a people pleaser, to a certain extent, we have like, it is threaded within you. Because you can't grow up in the society and the culture that we have and it not have touched you, because it's so everywhere. It's the same. it's just part of the biases that run so deep at the moment anyways still. And you have to know that when you're in these conversations, you can go and reflect and say, okay, how could I have done that differently? And how can I, because you're going to fail at it, especially, and you're going to fail at it a lot. But you get to reflect and you get to say like, oh, okay, well, how could I have communicated that a little bit more clearly or a little bit more assertively? But you don't have to question or not that it was valid that you did so. And that's what that other person on that, Lord knows, I'm going to tell you right now, somebody that is assertive, is that the amount of people that have tried to make me feel as though that opinion is foolishness, or tried to just brush me off as like, oh, here's Lori doing her, and that's fine. You could try and brush me off. You can and a lot of times too, the discredit comes because you might have some points that they don't want to hear. You might have some things that they have to look at to adjust their behavior in your relationship, or something that they maybe have to be aware of, how they're showing up in society kind of thing, because of so many conversations that need to take place now, even just around, the racism that takes place in Canada, like the bigotry, all these different things that again is threaded within us. It's not a matter of if you are, it's where you are and how much of it you are, and it's those conversations that are very uncomfortable. And so people feel as though it's attack on them as a person versus it being a conversation about a behavior to take a look at. And I understand it because when it happens to me too, I kick up that same dust and I get defensive and I get like, but that's not me. That's not me. And that's okay. But it's saying like, hey, when you do this, this is how it affects me. That's hard to hear sometimes for people. And if they're not used to hearing those things from a person, then it's extra confusing. So just like anything that we've talked about, when you make these changes in your life, it's going to be rare that people are on the other side right off the bat and are like, well, thank you for sharing that with me, and there might be, and that's like bonus, but you have to know we haven't really learned and grew up knowing how to have difficult conversations, because when as little kids, we came up and used our opinion, boy, girl, non-binary, whoever you are, if you've come up and had a conversation as a young child and tried to state your opinion, well, we didn't have the capacity to do so in a really calm, clear, eloquent way. We came up and we were like, but no, I want to blah, blah, blah. And then what did they do? You heard what I said, go do that. I'm the adult, you're the child. It was always diminished, dismissed for the most part as well. Or like you get what you get and like, I don't want to hear about it. Whatever those kind of things, your opinion right off the bat was dismissed. And so if they didn't like what they heard, they dismissed it. So what did we learn? When you don't like what you hear, you dismiss it, you push back, you shut it down. And so we're adults that don't have the actual tools or capacities, the most of us anyways. And two, when someone else does those things, it kicks up the knee-jerk reaction of rejection of all those different things. And so just know that like going into these things, it's triggering and difficult on both sides. Just because you don't want to hear this, I'm not going to shut my mouth. Doesn't mean like drilling it into them, which I can be very guilty for. But it does mean you don't shut down or shut up because their discomfort is your responsibility. It is not. Your responsibility is to advocate for yourself, because your needs cannot be met. And your point of view and your lens that matters cannot be seen if it is not shared. And it does matter, because right now we only have so many lenses that get voiced and put into practice, because for so long, those are the ones that have been only told to the world that are important enough to be heard and seen or implemented. And so if you really want to like be able to live your life, you have to share your lens, your perspective, and what means something to you, so that it can be, so you'll know who's on board with you, you'll know who's rocking with you, and you know who's not or needs time to come around. But that's how it comes to fruition. That's how you can live that life, by sharing that lens that needs, so that you can get further towards it.
And I think Because I'm sure there's some people that are like, oh, dear God, the blowback. I don't know if I can exercise this assertion. Definitely important to be aware. But I think that the whole reason why we wanted to have this chat is because of how much positive that can come from exercising your point of view for yourself, for your community, for your relationships, for your career. You are not doing yourself any favors by keeping it all sewn up and bundled up inside of you. Trust me, especially, I mean, look at relationships, whether they be with friends or a partner. And when you think of what Lori said can happen if you do suppress, one of the main feelings that will bubble up will be resentment. And how unfair to that individual that you are in tandem with that has no idea that this is being fed and harbored because you haven't said shit about it. But the minute that you are exercising that and you build healthy communication between a pairing, it is going to make your relationships and interpersonal interactions soar. Trust me, because most people, especially if it's people that you care about or interact with regularly, are going to have an appreciation that they are clear at understanding exactly where you're coming from. You are not leaving anything up for interpretation, which is ultimately what's going to happen if you do not provide context. We all know, we've talked about the chatter in our own brains. Well, guess what? Their narrator is telling your story. That's a recipe for disaster, especially for yourself. And then same when you look at the career mindset, you think in a boardroom setting, or most of what people's jobs are is problem solving to a degree. But no matter what that looks like in your role, that's what a career is basically to solve problems and bring things to fruition. And imagine all these amazing creative ideas or thoughts or contributions you have. But a lot of times, again, that lack of assertiveness, they live inside you. You owe it to the world to let it out. And it's okay if you bring something to the table and maybe that's not exactly their vision. Guess what? That's where collaboration comes into play. And then good ideas that you have become incredible ideas when you put community around it. So there really is a positive benefit. And that's why I want to emphasize that, because, we're like, there's going to be blowback and get ready for it. And I do think it's very important to know that, because we all know when people do not operate as you expect them to, it can really make it unsettling for the other party. But there is much positive impacts to be gained from making this part of your standard practice. And if you are on the passive side in a heavy way, it's going to be baby steps, because it's going to feel very uncomfortable for you. Or maybe you're so far right where you were like, fuck the patriarchy. And it has turned more into an aggressive standpoint where you're not allowing others to be heard.
Yeah.
And that could be something that's difficult to work through and taper back, to make space for the other side, to make space for the collaboration, for understanding that just because they don't agree with your point of view, both point of views can coexist.
Yes.
But once you get to that point, it's where the thrive starts to happen in your relationships. And when you look at it, we communicate with people. Aside from that time we were all holed in our homes and it was highly frowned upon, but we communicate with people all day, every day. Like, think of a standard day. It's all interacting with other human beings with their own thoughts, experiences, perceptions, ways of life. And that is why this tool is so important, because we are seeing this huge divide. And it is a big mix of people on hard right pendulum of aggression, hard right pendulum of passive. And look where the fuck that's gotten us, especially when you look in a social media landscape, which is a conversation for a whole other day.
Right. It is. It's worth it in every single way. And usually anything that has a little like a little bit of a difficult start or it's because that's what's on the other side of it, is the discomfort and going through it. But like you said, there's so much opportunity that the collaboration, and you said you spoke to it so wonderfully with work, but even in that relationship, I know for Dave and I, those stereotypical roles were reversed in regards to, there was Dave, who was a lot more I don't even know. He's just, think of me and then the polar opposite in regard. Our value systems are the same, but he is the polar opposite human in so many ways as I am, right? Like steady Dave, and just, just had this really like quiet, calm demeanor. He, here's the thing, when we've been together, like I said, 16 years now. And I think it would have been about 2 years in, we were living together and so forth. I remember there was a day where I said, oh, I've got to run this errand, this errand, this errand. Do you want to come with me? And he was like, yeah, sure. And as we were doing these errands and stuff, he's super grumpy. And I was like, what's your deal? Like in my head, I'm like, why'd you come if you're just going to be grumpy? And I finally said that, like, what is your deal? After about 2 hours in. And he's just like, I don't know. And I was like, why are you here? If you're just miserable like this, you wanted to come. He's like, I did not want to come. And I said, what? I did not want to come. Well, why did you say yes? Because I didn't want you. You wanted me to come and I didn't want to, disappoint you. And I was like, oh, no, you don't. I said, you would have been. Yes, you're right. I would have been disappointed for like that moment when you said no, because yes, I want you to come. I said, but that disappointment's mine and mine to get over, not yours to carry. That's mine to get over. I said, and then at the end of the day, I would have rather come and done this on my own. I would have moved on for the disappointment. I would have come, done my thing in a more upbeat, or like had a good time on my own, come home to you. And we would have had a good time together because you would have been doing what you actually wanted to do. And I was like, you don't have to put my needs in front of your own. I love that you want to do something nice, but you have to actually want to do it, kind of thing. And I remember he was like, okay, you say that now, but let's wait and see when you actually, you know what I mean? But it was good too, because of that conversation. I had to also be very aware that when he did say no, then, okay. And if I really wanted to come, I'd make a little bit joke about something, or really, like, oh, you should, but like I would leave it open enough that, whatever he wanted, that it was a fully respected. But what I'm saying is that as somebody that's been on the other side, and at times, yes, I want to hear it my way, like everybody does at the end of the day. Right. Our relationship grew so much stronger, and he became so much more confident within our relationship when he understood that what he wanted was just as valuable as what I wanted. What he wanted mattered just as much as what I wanted. And even if there was discomfort, disappointment, all those different things, that it didn't change that he did the right thing about speaking up for what he wanted. And me, it was my responsibility to understand that just because I'm so comfortable speaking up for my needs, that not everybody is. And that's, or my partner is, my male partner, that grew up in a society that really was like, you get to say what you want, have what you want, blah, 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 for the most part, and, and I like, obviously I'm really putting that into a small box. It doesn't just come down to that, but you get what I'm saying. But with him, I really have to, allow that space. So even communicating that to whoever, if you feel comfortable, whoever you're, in a relationship with, or friendships or so forth, just saying to them, like, I'm really working on using my voice. And so if you can help me in really giving me the space to get that out before you share your feeling, that would be very helpful. So even those kind of things, right? But it is so worth it, because it just deepens and enhances whatever environment you are in. And if it doesn't deepen and enhance it, it's probably not the one for you. And that's how you get
true. That's
clarity around where you fucking belong, and who your people are, and where your value, your value system is honored at your work, your value system is honored at home, your values, in your relationships, all those different things. And if it doesn't, and you just keep coming up against wall with it, and you're changing and bettering your delivery and all those different things, it's not your space. You shouldn't be there, because they're never going to value it. It was never about a collaboration. It was always about you meeting their needs.
Yes.
And that ain't nobody got time for that.
That's true at work. That's true in relationships.
Everything.
Yes. Excellent point. I'm glad you said that, Lori Joy King. Well,
I'm glad you said what you said, Chrissy Van.
Glad we made the space.
I'm glad we've had this episode. I feel very assertive. I want to take on the world today.
I really, you know what's funny? I really do. We should do this 8 a.m. situation more
I'm
often.
just going to walk. Let's practice. Just walk around town, just like sharing our needs with people.
We absolutely. Absolutely. You led us right into it, but motivation.
Maintenance.
What's your motivation maintenance? I feel like you gave us one little hint there.
Here's the thing that I've done with a lot of my friends around that have a challenge with this is we almost do like a little mock conversation, a little practice with somebody that is open, because that person can give feedback of like, okay, that came off, like you got a lot of feeling behind that. You maybe need like, so that you are able to get a little bit more clear on your language, get a little bit more clear on the fear, the tempo, the tone. And then even that, like it's almost like a mock trial, like, give them almost a couple of different examples of how it might go so that they can feel that discomfort in a very safe place without stakes at all. There's no stakes in this, right? And why that also helps is because we've talked about it before in episodes, is that your brain doesn't know the difference between being in the actual scenario and having a mock whatever, or practice of visualization, whatever that is. What your body knows the difference, because, the visceral reaction and stuff, if you're in and having all the senses of the person and blah, blah, blah. But what happens is your brain is already creating a mapping and a remembering and a little pathway around the language, around the interaction, around that feeling and what to do with that feeling if it kicks up of insecurity or pullback or wanting to like retreat. So if you have somebody that that is more comfortable in assertiveness, have a little practice with them. Even if you don't have a conversation that's coming up necessarily, you can even just do this, because it is a skill. It's a skill and it's a practice skill. And you're going against quite a bit of conditioning. So you have to know that ahead of time too, that you're kind of swimming against the tide a little bit on that. So having that opportunity to just have a little practice before the game goes a long way.
Well, and kind of tied to that, I had gathered this before we started here, and on that exact note, assessing your style. So what you're saying is a perfect way to basically do this audit. And a couple of the examples that it gave was taking that step back and asking, do you voice your opinions or do you remain silent? Do you say yes to additional work even when your schedule is full? Are you quick to judge or blame? So that sounding board, like Lori's saying with the PAL, will really help you to assess your style. But my motivation maintenance is a little more to do when you are in that moment about to put it into practice. And this is more because you can be assertive in even small ways. Like think of at a restaurant, what do you want to eat? I don't know. What are you eating? Like just pick what you want to fucking eat. But I'm talking in bigger conversations where maybe you fear that there could be conflict or you are feeling some type of way. Try to have the conversations once you've allowed the emotion to flow. So like if you're going into it already feeling frustrated or like you want to cry or really angry, maybe that's not the right time to have the conversation. Allow some of that top emotion to have its flow. Because more than likely, even if you've done a bit of an audit of yourself and you know your style, if you're operating out of that emotion, you're not going to bring your best self to the table. And you most likely are going to be hindered in communicating effectively. So try not to do these things in the heat of the moment, if possible. It is perfectly okay to even communicate with somebody if it's gotten to that point and being like, this is important for me to come back to this, but I'm feeling blank. I either need space or and then we will revisit. And that is perfectly okay. And we also know in those moments, sometimes when somebody's like, but I'm ready for a fight kind of thing, then you have to kind of take a step back and walk away and allow that to clear, because it's not going to be productive for either party.
Yeah. Oh, I absolutely agree with that.
Well, on this note, do you have a
Yeah.
quote for us today?
No, I've barely hanging on this morning.
Marvelous. Well, don't you worry. I do.
Oh, good. You always do. So I always know that, like, if I forget and then we're here, I'm just like, Chrissy's got this.
Because it's tradition. The practice of assertiveness is being authentic in our dealings with others, treating our values and persons with decent respect in social contexts, refusing to fake the reality of who we are or what we esteem in order to avoid disapproval, the willingness to stand up for ourselves and our ideas in appropriate ways in appropriate contexts. I don't like that it's by a dude, Nathaniel Brandon. There's nothing against dudes.
By Natalie Brandon.
Natalie. Gotta love Natalie. Well, that is your motivation.
We made it.
That was a fun one. I liked that.
That was a fun one.